So we're now on Daf Chaf Hey Yom Days. Omar of Menashe. The Gemara now quotes a statement of Rabbi Menashe, who distinguishes between a psul edus d'oraisa as opposed to psul edus d'Rabbanan. Gazlan to Divreim, let's say he's a Masak Bekubius Mafricha Yona, and the Chachamim Pasal in Fredus, they say we're not going to rely on him. Is Kashal edus Isha, if he testifies that this woman's husband died, we rely on his testimony. But Gazlan to Divrei Torah, someone who is a full-fledged Gazlan, not that he was a gambler, and he's a Gazlan min Torah, he's Pasal edus min Torah, is Pasal even for edus Isha. So according to Rabbi Menashe, an aid that's Pasal min Torah is Pasal even for edus Isha. And therefore, according to Rav Yosef, who says that a person is believed to incriminate himself and make himself into a psul rasha d'oraisa, how could we accept his testimony to be matir a woman when he says her aktiv, I killed him? He's Pasal edus Isha because he's a Pasal d'oraisa. If you accept Rav Yosef, who says that self-incrimination is accepted. Nema, should we have to say, we out of no choice, that Rav Menashe, the Yomek Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda Mishnah says that if he says, I murdered your husband, we're not going to rely on him. And she's not allowed to get married. And maybe that reflects the Shita Rav Menashe, that a person is believed to incriminate himself, in this case, make himself into a murderer, which is a psul d'oraisa, and therefore we have to disqualify his testimony. There are Rabbanan, on the other hand, who say that her activity nase, they hold that even though he's a rasha by his own admission, nevertheless, we're talking about edus Isha, and in the case of edus Isha, we're mekil, and rely on someone who is possibly edus min Torah. So it comes out now that our Mishnah is against Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, I shouldn't call it our Mishnah. I mean, the Mishnah in Gittin. Or I should say Rabbi Menashe. Let's just call it Rabbi Menashe. I can even be reconciled with Rabbanan who say activity not say each, though we rely on his testimony. Time of the Rabbanan. The reason why, if the Rabbanan say that her activity not say is kidarava, and that means that self-incrimination is not acceptable in a Jewish court of law. Adam karvetz al atzuv and other mesim atzma rasha. This is what's called, I'm going to impress you now with my knowledge of philosophy, modus tollens. Have you ever heard of that? That means all S is P, X is S, therefore X is P. So that's modus tollens. So how does it apply here? A person is karov liatzma. Every karov is pasal edus. And therefore, a person is pasal when he testifies about himself, because he's a karov to himself and a karov is pasal. So therefore, according to Rava, we understand the Rabbanan Shita that there's no such thing as self-incrimination. We cannot rely on a person who makes himself into a rasha. And therefore, even when he says her active, he's not believed to make himself into a rasha, and we can rely on his edus. And this is called, in the language of the Gemara in Sanhedrin, al dinan dibura, like we only hear half of what he says. We don't accept all of what he says. So if a witness testifies to active, I murdered him, and therefore by his own admission he is a rasha, he's not believed to say that he himself killed the person. We do a palgina dibura. We're going to accept the fact that so-and-so was killed, but not that he, the witness, killed him. So the Gemara asks, Lema Rav Yosef the Omak Rav Yehuda. So we say there of Yosef, who believes a person when he incriminates himself, and therefore he disqualifies him for Edus. And Ploni Ravani Lirtzoni is not believed, and that's called Lidvarecha Roshata. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda that in the case of Raktiv, he's not believed because he, by his own admission, is incriminating himself, making himself into a Rosh's possibly Edus. And that's against the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon say in our Mishnah, Haraktiv ti nasei ishto. Rav Yosef, I could be reconciled even with the Rabbanon Shita that Haraktiv is Neman. Shani Edus Isha Diakilu Be Rabbanon. When it's a matter of being matir a woman, otherwise she'll be an aguna, the Rabbanon would make ill. And therefore, when he says Haraktiv, he's believed. Even though we're not going to apply this Agin and Dibura according to Rav Yosef. And therefore the principle should be Lidvarecha Roshata. The answer is that even a Rasha is believed to testify about a woman that she could get married. Uvav Menashe Diomar Ki Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Menashe says that in the case of a Gazlan Doraisa, who's possible in Torah, he's not believed even on Edus Isha. He's saying that, Rabbi Menashe, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says Haraktiv Loti Nasei. So we don't rely on his testimony. We don't accept Halgin Dibura, and therefore we'll apply the principle of Dvarecha Rasha. So by your own admission, you're a Rasha, and therefore we cannot allow his wife to get married. But I myself, says Rabbi Yosef, I hold that even a Gazlan Doraisa who's possible in Torah is kosher li'edus isha hikilu be'rabbanon. Rabbi Menashe, who holds that psuli edus min Torah are disqualified even for edus isha, he holds that we're going to say palgina dibura. And therefore, the Rabbanan hold and even in a case where he says, Haraktiv Neman, we're going to accept his edus that so-and-so died. We're not going to accept his edus that he killed him. The Mishnah says, Haraktiv is lo tinase ishto, but haragnuhu tinase ishto. If he's part of a group, he's part of a mafia. So the Gemara now asks a kasha on Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda makes the distinction between Haraktiv, he's not believed, and Aragnuhu, that if he's part of a group, he is believed. So the Gemara asks immediately, Maishna Araktivu, Maishna Aragnuhu. What difference it make whether or not he did a solo job and he murdered the guy, according to his testimony, or he was part of a group? Even if he's part of a group, he's a Rasha. It's not a case where I was one of the mafia members of the group that killed him, but I was with them. I didn't kill him. I witnessed that they killed him. And now the Gemara wants to give support that this interpretation of Yehuda is correct, that it's Ani Hayisi Im Harga. But Tanya, we have it in a brayso. Amrullah, the Chacham turned to Rabbi Yehuda, and they say, Maisa belistim echad, an armed robber, sheyatza lihareg b'megizas kaputkia. How do you translate the word lehareg? Do you have any? You have a translation there, the word lehareg? All right, we'll try to figure it out. If you don't have a translation, I don't have a translation. What?
It says, but the Brisa teaches.
No, what does the word lehareg mean? Forget about the Brisa. What does the word lehareg? Just translate lehareg.
He was taken out.
So I guess he was condemned to death. I think that's what he means. The Omer Lahem, and the list said, L'chu imrule li Eshes Shimon ben Cohen. Ani haragti es baila b'knisasi lilud. This is his last testimony on it. He's about to be beheaded. And he says that the wife of Shimon ben Cohen tell the wife that I killed her husband when I went into Lud. The Amrile, according to another Girsa, the listim said, B'knisaso Lud. Meaning that when Shimon ben Cohen went into the city of Lud, based on the aegis of this armed robber, they trusted him that he killed the wife of Shimon ben that Shimon ben Cohen's wife could get married. That he had actually killed Shimon ben Cohen. So we see clearly that as someone who says her active, we can marry off his wife based on his aegis. So this is against Rabbi Yehuda. Amalahem, so Rabbi Yehuda defends himself, and he says, Misham Rai, you're bringing a proof. He didn't say that I killed him. He said I was together with the others, but I myself didn't touch him. And this is going to support what we said before in the name of Yehuda, that in our Mishnah it says Harganuhu doesn't mean that I was part of the mafioso and I was part of the murder, but rather I saw that they murdered. So the Gemara says, listim kitani, and this is a kasha on the brisa. What's the kasha on the brisa? Since it says that Yotzili Hare, he was taken out to be killed because he was a listim, so there must have been witnesses that saw him kill other people. He was a mafioso. And therefore, he's not believed in his avis. So if we have witnesses that testify that he's a rotzeach, he's possibly avis according to everyone, even according to Chachamim. So how can we rely on him? And the Gemara answers, he wasn't a listim, but nitfas al yidei listius. He was suspect of being a listim. He was together with listim. He hung out with the mafiosos. And they killed people, and he was grabbed and condemned to death together with them. So the Gemara says, "Vayotzeli hare katani." It seems that he was the rotzeach, and they were mechayev and bisa. And the Gemara answers, "Beidina di ovdei kochavim." This was a bezdin of goyim delo daiki. They don't really clarify the truth of the man of a katali, and they put people to death even though they don't deserve to die. And they suspected that he was a listim and he was one of the others and he was part of the murder and the mafiosa. Therefore, they put him to death. But really, he was not a murderer and therefore he's kosher li'ezus. Okay, just quickly to learn the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, HaChacham, who could be made for a neder, even if he's alone, he doesn't have a tribunal with him. Sha'asar es ha'isha b'neder al baila. And he, shall we say, validated the neder. And as a result of that neder, this woman who had taken a neder is not allowed to have hanah from her husband. And let's say the husband himself was not mefer his neder, he could have annulled the neder b'yom shom. Now they take the neder to a chacham, and he doesn't find a Pesach or Charot. And therefore she's asura al baila by validating the neder. is hareza lo yinos. Again, there's a problem of lazus vasayim, of chashad. People are going to accuse him that the reason why he couldn't find a heter and a pesach to be mated the neder is because he wanted to marry, and that would force the husband to give a divorce. But miana, if we're talking about a yesoma ketana sheisiua acheha, she's less than 12 years old. So that's not kedusha doraisa, but rather kedusha ishus derabbanon, and she could be mema'enes up until the age of 12. And miana bo ain't a tzricha get. She doesn't need a get. All she has to do is mian. I'm not interested in living with him. And she's muteres l'chol ad. So the mian has to take place in front of Bezdin. And this particular chacham was on the Bezdin. And in front of him, she was mima'enes, o shecholtza lefanov, or the Yavam and the Yevamot had chalitza in the presence of this chacham. In that case, in contrast to the Reisha Yisrael, he's allowed to marry. Mipnei shehu bezdin, because he's only part of a bezdin. There are another two dayanim who are sitting with him. And we're not going to suspect three people of doing something against the law and creating this kind of a sheker. But when in the Reisha, he's the only member of the court, it's a one-man bench, and he validates the neder, or let's put it this way, he gives the Baal who want reason to divorce his wife, then we have to be worried about sheker, and we're not going to allow him to get married. So now we're up to the Gemara here, which is on Chafheim and Beis Ha-Hitira. Now,